Well, Shamus McPhee, welcome to Call the Witness here at the Roma Pavillion. We're very pleased to have you with us.
It's very gratifying to be here.
I'm pleased to hear that. You're going to speak today about your experience as an artist and as an activist in relation to Roma rights, and specifically in relationship to your experience of growing up at the Bobbin Mill Gypsy Traveller site in Pitlochry in Scotland.
That's correct.
Now, we're going to look at a few images.
Stills, yeah. If you run us through the stills.
So, can you tell us about your experiences of Bobbin Mill as we look at these images?
Yeah, well, it became known to me within the last few years that we were subject to a racial experiment at Bobbin Mill. That it wasn't a place that had just sprung up out of coincidence, you know. It had been systematically planned by the authorities as a site by which to separate a group of people on racial grounds in order to promote the acculturation of Gypsy Traveller culture, and so that it would be swallowed up within, you know, a more integrated society. And this would then remove the need to provide any rights or entitlements for gypsies in Scotland, so they would effectively become invisible and be banished to the outer reaches. So, you know, it was concerned with removal of a problem group, and you know, the best way to do this was effectively to just throw up an old hut at low cost and allow them to be abandoned until, you know,
and we have some
until the community had disappeared. Yeah, we have reference to it there through the documentation as an experiment, and we have some of the stills of the conditions on site at Bobbin Mill. So you can see the caravans and the old hut here, which Rosanna spoke of earlier. That was originally provided as accommodation for my brothers due to the overcrowding, but eventually my father became banished to the hut, so he would retreat to the hut, and it became like his inner sanctum there.
Can you tell us a bit about what conditions have been like at Bobbin Mill? Yeah,
I mean, conditions at Bobbin Mill have been extremely Spartan, but you have to look at the mindset that underpins the experiment. It was deliberately discriminatory because it was felt that standard accommodation, the provision of standard accommodation, might prejudice the success of the experiment. So, you know...
In what way?
Because these people weren't ready for standard accommodation, they weren't ready to be integrated into society, so they had to go through like a selection process and gradually be moulded, because they were malleable, into being more responsible adult human beings, so that, you know, it would naturally follow that they would want to be like settled people and would gravitate towards settled community.
So you're saying that these huts that we can see in these photographs were acted as a kind of a halfway house between living in what kind of conditions would the Gypsy Travellers that were selected for this experiment have been living in previously?
Well, they would have been living in very shabby conditions. You know, in gullies, which are roughly constructed tents with stones at either end, you know, and these would cover hazel poles to which the tent would be tied. So they would just crawl into that, spread their straw, have like a smoke hole and a flap for the tent, so they would just be able to crawl out and in, you know, and they were, you know, rudimentary dwellings, you know, in that sense, but very effective in keeping the warmth. And the people had, you know, a lot of fresh air as well, because there was the exposure, you know, they could just crawl through the flap and be out in the open.
I see, so these huts were seen as a kind of a halfway house, a stepping stone to a more...
This was more a settlement programme which was initiated by the state, by the Development Department, and, you know, under the auspices of the Secretary of State through defence regulations, they requisitioned, as Rosanna said, old military buildings and billets, and thought that these were ideal because they could be provided at no cost whatsoever or very low cost, and were seen as an ideal remedy, like a quick fix for the removal of an entire group of people from society.
And what do you think prompted this?
Well, I think, you see examples of this in pre-Second World War Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
You see examples of this in pre-Second World War Nazi Germany, where specially designated stopping places were created for the gypsies. And it owed more to the need to contain them so that they could be immobilised and dealt with more effectively by the authorities. So the mindset which underpins Bobbin Mill, you can see that a lot of the people involved there had a military background and had maybe seen places like Bergen-Belsen or Auschwitz in Germany and adapted that to suit their own ideology in Scotland. Right. So they've actually latched on to what's essentially Nazi ideology and adapted and modified that.
Do you think there was any awareness of those associations when those decisions were being made?
I don't know that anything had actually prompted it, that there was an awareness, because it was part of a continuous chain of events. It wasn't something that just erupted out of the blue. You had the 1895 Scottish Traveller report, and I don't know if anyone's read that, but it talks about the need to eradicate the vermin. The gypsies, travellers and tinkers, the words are all used interchangeably to refer to the group. But that actually predates Nazi ideology, so this is part of an ongoing chain of thought. It's not something that just emerged overnight.
What kind of numbers of gypsy and travellers in Scotland are we talking about?
Well, official estimates project a figure of 23,000, but that doesn't account for 90% of gypsy travellers in Scotland who live in houses, because there are no head counts on people who live in housing. They're no longer deemed to be gypsies, so they lose their gypsy status within 2 years of moving into a house, and that's also commonplace in England. The authorities tend to take a dim view of gypsies who move into housing, so they're considered to have lost their ethnic status by doing so, by dint of that fact. So I would say, in Scotland, there are probably around 50,000 gypsy travellers. There are about 3,000 or 4,000 in my local area, and they're known to me either through family background, family tree, or by their diction, by all of the different factors that allow me to differentiate between gypsies and non-gypsies.
So you can recognise
them. So I might hear them in the passing,
okay.
in the local bookmakers or wherever.
Right.
Catch a few words I can't, and I say, oh, that's one.
Yeah.
That's a knacking.
Yeah. So kind of a sort of underground sort of network possibility of sort of recognising people without them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that most are at pains to live in denial because of the climate of reprisals Rosanna spoke about. They're very aware or hyper aware of the consequences if they disclose their ethnic identity and what that might mean for their social or professional advancement or development. It's effectively the death knell. 1 minute the light's on, and then the minute they know you're a gypsy traveller, as Rosanna said at one point, the lights all go off.
Right. We've got some more pictures of Bobbin Mill. Why do you think Bobbin Mill was chosen as the site of the experiment?
I think because it's naturally secluded and screened, on woodland barrows, so it provides a perfect setting to create like a social portiere and hide, the offensive inhabitants from the eyes of, the civilised public.
So a natural screen.
So a natural screen, but it was also a traditional stopping place which had been favoured by gypsy travellers. So Nackins had been encamped there since the 18th century. My mother's people, Johnstons, who are referred to, Pitlochry Johnsons in the 1895 report, would kind of sashay between two campsites in Pitlochry, which straddled the town. There was one at Aldower Woods behind Arthur Palace and one at Bobbin Mill. So the family, when they had fallouts or disputes, some would get up, grab all their belongings and move to Bobbin Mill, or vice versa.
Right, I see.
And that way they would avoid conflict.
Yeah. So although the Traveller kind of name would suggest a, I think this is true of lots of gypsies in Roma, would suggest a nomadic route across lots of sort of land, a widespread area. It seems that migration can be across quite small areas.
I think in Scotland, you know, there were families who became localised and sedentarised to a certain extent, so that they didn't actually go beyond, you know, the boundaries of their own little world. They would travel in a cycle during the year, so they might do berry picking, they might go and gather reeds for basket making, they might do agricultural labour on the farms, but they always had something lined up within their own little shire or district, and that meant they could just, you know, return to those places and be tolerated for a short time at a certain point in the year, a certain juncture.
So the idea of travelling becomes almost symbolic, without necessarily having to mean traversing great distances.
Yeah, I mean, you know, you can travel from here to Padova or wherever, and it's still, you know, it's not a great distance, but you know, you're still going through the motions of, you know, movement. So it was, you know, essential to them to be able to up sticks and leave and, you know, remove to another area as and when the need suited. It might not have been far away. You might have been talking only a matter of miles.
Yeah, yeah. How have the local population reacted to the Bobbin Mill site and the people that live there now?
I think, you know, it's been quite a varied and mixed reaction, depending on the point in time at which you wish to, you know, view that reaction. Before it was opened up as a walkway, a system of walks for ramblers, we were shunned to a great extent by members of the community because it was more secluded then, and they didn't want to have anything to do with us, so there was like a divorce settlement there, you know, whereby we didn't interfere in their lives and they didn't interfere in ours. But now that, you know, you've got this interface between the settled community and the Gypsy Travellers, we've been subject to stoning, abuse, people, you know, scratching vehicles, vandalising cars. So the racial abuse is definitely on the increase, particularly visible amongst the youth element.
And how do you deal with that kind of situation?
Well, ordinarily I jump out with a 14-pound hammer and shout a string of obscenities. If you don't go, you're going to get some of this, and of course that usually works, but there's no point in contacting the authorities and, you know, recording it as a racist incident through the police, because we've tried that line before, and, you know, invariably they come back. Myself and Rosanna were actually on the racial incidents committee for Tayside Constabulary. We were invited along as Gypsy Traveller representatives. So they sent us out an end of year statement saying that no racial incidents had ever taken place against any Gypsy Travellers. Now, if you believe that, then I'm sorry, you know, there's something sadly wrong, and you need to, you know, revisit your thinking, because, you know, incidents against Gypsy Travellers are more commonplace in this day and age.
Let's move on to this next image. Can you tell us about this image?
Yeah, this is the grave of my great-grandfather, who actually was one of thousands of Scottish Gypsy Travellers. This is him seated here, James Johnston, who risked life and limb in service for Great Britain and also to liberate France, so that people in France could lead better, safer, more secure lives. So I think Mr. Sarkozy owes a debt of thanks and gratitude to the Gypsy Traveller population from the UK, because they went to the French shores in their thousands, and as I say, got little thanks or respect for playing their part in, freeing France, liberating it from the German war machine.
Going back to your comments,
and this is the thanks they got on their return home, actually, to be consigned to a pauper's pit in the corner of the local cemetery.
So this is separate from the main cemetery?
Well, this corner of it was for the paupers, the people who couldn't afford proper headstones or anything lavish. So what they did was they actually transplanted the crosses from other parts of the cemetery, because the pauper's pit used to be in the centre. And what they did was they uprooted those graves, threw them aside under a pile of brushwood, and when I actually contacted the relevant authorities to complain, they then erected these small crosses. But we don't actually know where the people are buried now.
Can you talk about this image?
Yeah, this is an image of the outside of my father's hut. It was a hut which had been subdivided into 4 apartments, and each compartment contained 1 bedroom, a living room with a coal fire. Then you had a cold water tap, and right next to the kitchen or scullery you would have the WC, and that's not considered to be very hygienic these days. For that reason alone, it was condemned in 1962 by the authorities. But he continued to live there, and they continued to take rent and rates, and then latterly council tax and television licence fees, etc., for the privilege of staying in that as an ex-World War II veteran.
You mentioned the setting up of the experiment in the late 40s. How was that so-called experiment monitored by the authorities, would you say?
It was monitored through, a number of measures. Vertices of government would feed information into a central think tank. So there were like a toing and froing of missives and letters between the local authority, Perth and Kinross Council, the Scottish Development Department, Secretary of State for Scotland, and it would also be visited regularly by the local constabulary, the police, and a Church of Scotland representative who was a chaplain for the Church of Scotland. He was heavily involved, implicated in lining up families for selection so that they could then be placed in each of the apartments, which was like a conveyor belt, It was just taking people, normalising them, and making them more socially acceptable.
I see. And who would be considered a suitable family for this processing?
Well, it was based on the premise that you could sever all links with the external gypsy community. So the ones who would encamp around the hut, they would not be seen as fit for inclusion in the hut. They would need to be banished until such time as they saw the error of their ways and were more malleable, as I say, and more pliable and compliant. So it was basically, they were looking at families, especially who had children, small children, that they could make them socially responsible, make them pay rent, make them put their children to school, and that way make them slot into, their compartment in society.
I see. And how do you think they've subsequently assessed the efficiency of their plan?
Well, over a 20-year period, they built up a whole voluminous body of paperwork, 372 pages in the Tinker experiment files. So, that only ended in 1966. But in the interim, they held a symposium of local authorities in Inverness in 1958, which decided that it should be hailed as a moderate success because, after all, it was making these people socially responsible. And it was then unfurled and replicated nationally, as Rosanna pointed to earlier on in her talk. We had sites springing up at Muir of Ord, Aberdeenshire, Kent. We had 47 homes in the New Forest with very Spartan conditions, just running water and blacked out windows. But I think some of the experiments had to be abandoned because, for instance, there was some level of insurgency in Kent. People didn't take to it, and they rioted, so they had to be closed down earlier than had previously been planned.
In
Kent.
Down in England?
In England.
So this was something that was
happening
across
it was happening
the UK.
all over the UK, and in that respect, Bobbin Mill set a precedent because it was established in 1946, the year of the Nuremberg trials, you see. And it showed how they could emulate foreign policy and adapt and use that as a model of good practice. So it was really the first of its kind, Bobbin Mill, and in that sense, it is vitally important that we respect it as a cultural heritage site for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah. How do you think they could have proposed something like Bobbin Mill differently? What would an ideal Bobbin Mill be, do you think?
Well, for me, an ideal Bobbin Mill would be this image here of the caravans in the snow, but with better service provision. As an individual, I don't think there's any excuse for treating people as subhumans and keeping them in inhuman and degrading living conditions. So we did need basic amenities like electricity, hot water, toilets. But I'd rather have had those in the likes of a jack cabin or porter cabin, which could be communally accessed and have retained our caravans. So that would have been my ideal Bobbin Mill. But other people, it was really down to the individual. Some wanted pod houses, some wanted luxury Val de Loire caravans, £25,000 each with leather upholstery, air conditioning, and a pet corner. Some wanted top of the range chalets, not second hand stock that had been removed from a holiday campsite at a basic cost of £3,000 with all sorts of problems.
We're going to look through some more
Okay.
images of Bobbin Mill. Can you just talk to us about these? You might see them better on here, actually, Shamus.
Yeah, well, this is me outside my father's hut. You can see that it's readily falling apart. The gate's in a state of disrepair there, and this is in the latter stages of its existence before it was actually destroyed in 2009, November 2009. It demolished. This is the front door of his dwelling, and you can see a horseshoe there which has inscribed on it, "Here's luck." Now, gypsy travellers are very superstitious, and so they like to retain things like horseshoes. They're very fond of them and attached to those kind of things as symbols. But having served in the Second World War, and as someone who received the Burma Star, I don't think you could put the case that my father had a lot of luck in life. He died a pauper. He didn't see the upgrade because the chalets came in on the day he passed away. So he never actually received any upgrade. This is me carrying some firewood around, which then had to be split by using a 14-pound hammer and a log splitter.
So that's the other use of the hammer?
And then I would saw it up, for firewood, because each person depends on having a stock of logs, to help them through the winter. Temperatures can plummet to as low as -29 in Scotland.
So that's your main source of fuel?
That's our main source of fuel, yeah. So I'm responsible with the chore of cutting up all the firewood because I'm the most able.
Okay.
And it falls to me. If there's not enough, then everyone gets on my case, like Rosanna there. I'm cold. you know, and gives me a hard time. So.
So this is you cooking outside?
This is a campfire with the chitties, you know, and the kettle there. So the chitties, like the pole, you would hang the kettle on like a tripod. And yeah, we love to get outside the caravans because there's an immediacy with the outside, you know, the out of doors, and just get an outside fire going. But that's something which is now prohibited by law. So
to
it's
have
like
a fire outside?
Well, we did have a fire outside, you know, but it's now been banned, and if you wish to start an outside fire, you can be slapped with a £25,000 fine, which, you know, obviously we can't afford to pay. So it's like another attack on the family as a cultural unit, I feel, yeah, by the authorities. So this is my caravan. This has been my home since 1999, and if you wish to progress through university and then do a postgraduate in translation, I'd advise against it, because here's the kind of thing you might end up in. You can see that it's a 1960s touring caravan which is clearly substandard and doesn't have any amenities. It doesn't have running water, electricity. It's in a dilapidated state, and yet the council wished to bill me for £6,500 in council tax for that property and threatened me with bankruptcy. So I'm currently awaiting their final decision on the matter. It's passed through a series of sheriff officers. Here's one of the letters I received from the local authority stating that although there's an anomaly between the Local Government Finance Act, which states that a caravan must be liable for council tax, it cannot be classed as a dwelling under the Housing Act and therefore cannot be exempted.
I see.
So, you know, so there's a catch-22, there's a flaw in the legal system there, which is allowing authorities to discriminate actively against gypsy travellers, and that's never been counteracted because we can't access legal redress. Here's an image of the diggers going in to flatten the old dwelling in 2009. That would have been November 20th. So it was, you know, you may have thought that it was bringing to an end the Bobbin Mill experiment, but in fact, you know, the replacement chalets, it just served to, you know, continue the discriminatory treatment. So it's like discrimination in perpetuity.
Because the replacements were substandard?
Because they were substandard as well. So it's the same mindset, the same, you know, underlying belief that you cannot provide these people with decent accommodation because they'll mess it up and foul up the ground. They're just vermin. This is a picture of me. I'm hitting a log splitter with the yellow handle there on the head. I'm using a 14-pound hammer. So what you do is you stick that in the logs when they're, you know, too onerous to split by hand, and use them as wedges, and it will eventually split the whole log. But it involves a lot of, you know, strain and physical effort. Yeah, it's pretty hard going. That's where the place where I was born, just off to my right here. There's like a pile of bricks, and I was actually born there as an experimentee in the experiment, because it was begun in 1946 and I didn't come along till 1971. Okay. So I had no say in the matter. It wasn't a lifestyle choice at all. You know, as I said in an interview with Gallic TV, I'd much rather have been adopted by Madonna, but that wasn't to be, unfortunately. Couldn't get anyone to take me on.
So this is one of the newer huts? This
is one of the newer huts, but you can't really tell, you know, the condition of the hut from that photograph. They suffered a lot of burn damage. They were stored outside for 2 years and left uncovered, you know, exposed to the elements. So there was a lot of, you know, rain damage and patches of dampness and moisture, mould. There were tiles missing all over the place. The steps are broken, nothing works. It's all, you know, it's like very cheap workmanship which has been carried out, you know, in order to just provide a quick fix, shut these people up and lock them away.
So little improvement on the previous cabins?
Well, little improvement from my perspective. I mean, I don't feel that these are culturally appropriate. I see a caravan as a cultural identifier, so I prefer to live in a caravan. And I actually asked for an upgrade which would have seen, you know, a much improved caravan being bought in by the council, but they refused to do so.
This is Bobbin Mill in the snow, that's why it looks very bleached out. We've got another one of your gas canisters.
Conditions in the snow, as I say, it can fall to about -29 in Scotland, so your gas freezes at 0. You don't have any cooking, any heating, any light.
This is also Bobbin Mill?
This is Bobbin Mill in the snow as well. This is Big Chill. This is a painting I did called Big Chill at Bobbin Mill, which looks at the, you know, the Arctic blast faced by Scottish Gypsy Travellers. So it's looking really at the treatment meted out to them, you know, that they don't have any friends, they're on the hard shoulder in society, and nobody really cares whether they survive. You know, so, you know, I've seen Rosanna roll into bed and seen her the next day having to cut her hair off the side of the caravan because it had frozen to the windows. I had to carry all our gas bottles to my father's coal fire to thaw them out every 20 minutes. You know, I'd be going to a caravan carrying gas bottles. You know, we had no light for degree exams. We had to study by candlelight, and if you couldn't afford a box of candles out of Morrison's for £2 a shot, then, you know, how do you prepare for your exam the following day? So life is, you know, very difficult, very problematic, and in many ways the bureaucrats went out of their way to make it more difficult. It was quite deliberate, and their attitude's been very unflinching and inflexible.
We're going to look at some more of your paintings.
Okay.
Perhaps you could tell us a bit about some of them.
Well, this is one entitled Los Desaparecidos, which refers to the physical disappearance of nomadic people by the state, and is, you know, a bit of a recurring theme in parts of Latin and South America. So, you know, there are obvious parallels, for instance, between the treatment of indigenous peoples in Ecuador, where urban revanchism has seen them being chased, driven back from the cities into the, you know, into the rural belt. But in Scotland, it's both urban and rural. There's a zero tolerance policy in place, and, you know, scenes like this are being increasingly consigned to the past. This one I called Paradise Lost. It was an attempt at pointillism by me, because this is for a gypsy traveller to be out in the open, you know, in the early morning, with the light just breaking through the trees. That's you know, that's their idea of paradise and, you know, a utopia.
A big contrast to the big chill that we saw at the beginning.
It's a big contrast, but it probably would have been, you know, at a different time in the year. I would say, you know, early summer, breaking from spring into early summer, when everything's fresh and budding, you know, and when you can enjoy the outdoors more readily.
Let's just, I think we missed this.
This one I called Cannon Fodder. This is my grandfather who fought in the Somme, Shamus McPhee, and this is my grandmother and my uncle Prefab, the very swarthy, squat kid on the lap. I think, you know, what's important to remind ourselves is that, you know, these people who don't have a place in society actually, you know, fought and died as well in some instances for our country. So, you know, I don't think it's very fair to treat their progeny in the way that they're being excluded, and you know, the levels of intolerance really need to be tackled urgently.
The title seemed very important in your paintings.
Well, I use the titles really for social commentary and to engender debate and discussion. People would normally come up to me, I put them on display in local venues and also further afield, and they'll approach me and say, oh well, the frame looks as if it might be worth more than the painting, and make disparaging remarks. So yeah, they will come up and they'll ask if something's of interest to them, but in a way in which they need to satisfy their own curiosity about Gypsy Travellers. So it's like a lead-in. You can use art as a lead-in. I don't need to actually say anything to them. They'll come up and wish to engage with me. And this one I call Bois Perils. It's a family of pearl fishers, and they've got a cart with a broken wheel there, and they're trying to hoist the baby about with their sticks here, their camp sticks protruding from the end of the cart. And I did that in quite a linear way, so that people would see that they're almost ghost-like, but there are lines of separation there that people try to invoke and say, you're not a gypsy, you're not a traveller. So they always want to attach a label to you and mark you down as tainted. And the actual gypsies themselves, in many cases, see their treatment as being similar to that of black people in the 60s. Now, a black pearl is a very rare pearl in the rivers in Scotland. It's something to be valued. So that's why I call that Black Perils.
And how's being an artist been received within your community, would you say?
Well, I think there is an onus on the arts, particularly within my own family, and I use the term the arts quite loosely to incorporate things like storytelling, music. This is one of my brother here winning the Inverness Championship at the piping. So there's always been a tradition within Gypsy Travellers. It's seen as like a different form of education, an educational other, which means that school is viewed as like an out of doors experience where you can get your hands dirty and you can try to focus on things that hold more appeal or more value for you, rather than 9 to 5 settled existence, mortgage, work doing computer technology. This is one of my grandaunt, who was a woman called Kate Johnson and lived in the shack at Bobbin Mill. That's the original sketch there, which was a pencil sketch, photocopied in sepia and laminated for the purpose of the event today. My sister Rosanna has to take some of the credit there because I gave it to her. She wanted to refresh her artistic skills, having studied art at school, and I said, well, just use the numbers. It's like a painting by numbers exercise for the kids. So she got halfway through and then,
I see.
she gave up.
This is a joint painting?
It's a joint venture, yeah. So it's a collaboration, social partnership, if you like.
I think we can see it here used in these posters. Maybe you can't see it in the audience, but oh yes, you can at the bottom there.
Yeah, well, we did make use of that for, the demonstration outside the Equality and Human Rights Commission headquarters in Glasgow. So art has been involved, in a way, as a form of activism, because, there are things that come through by means of visual imagery that you cannot express, that you cannot put into words, and it's got more permanence. I think you can take like a fragmentary and very transitory experience and give that added permanence by laying it down as a piece of art. So it's there for posterity, and no one can stop that. It's a process which is unstoppable. So I might decide, I'm tired of speaking to you or trying to explain or justify my existence, but here, take this because I'm reclaiming my identity here. This is like a form of cultural reaffirmation for me. And whether you like it or not, that's for you to decide.
What do you think about the idea of art as a site of resistance?
I think, yeah, as I've just said to you, that, you know, art can be used primarily as a rebellion against pressures and against attempts to oppress and repress your inner basic instincts. So, you know, you can use art to convey a message which is unspoken, which is unstoppable, which is in itself, you know, per se defiant. And no one can quibble with that, you know. You can cobble together as many Gypsy Traveller camp scenes as you want, and who can stop you? Mm-hmm. And you know, it's about also taking art, through art, taking your place alongside settled society in terms of being part of a global polysystem whereby everyone must interact and they all depend on each other. So that's why, you know, my art's not exclusionist. I do people like Princess Diana and Bob Marley and non-Gypsy Traveller scenes alongside Gypsy Traveller art in order to, you know, impress upon people the fact that we all need and rely on each other. There was a woman there who asked me to do a portrait of her 3 kids, this one. And she was a non-Gypsy Traveller, but she couldn't get a portrait of her 3 kids, so without my assistance, that would never have been possible for her. So I was providing a service there.
So you're working across communities in that way?
Working across communities, and as I say, you know, using art as a means of communicating and building bridges between communities and helping to promote better understanding.
Let's have a look at some portraits of members of your family.
Okay.
You want to talk to us about these and their titles, which I think are interesting?
Yeah, well, the one on the left is a watercolour entitled ESP, and that's Rosanna in her heyday. Before she... Some years ago, I hasten to add. So I think it captivates her sense. She has like this extrasensory perception. She's very highly attuned to, you know, things which you might only acknowledge within your subconscious. So she can pick up on a lot of things just through vibe and, you know, the way that circumstances may be changing over a period of time. She's very highly attuned to that. The one on the right is the Bean Manishi. The Bean Manishi in Kant, Manishi means young woman, right? And a Bean Manishi is like a yuppie, a young, upwardly mobile woman. So it's showing you that, you know, there are people who aspire professionally within the ranks of Gypsy Travellers, despite all of the barriers that, you know, hover over them. So this is my other sister, Bridget, and she is a Gallic peripatetic primary teacher who goes around the schools, and in that sense is nomadic, goes around the schools in North Perthshire teaching kids Gaelic and helping them to participate in the local mod, which is a Gaelic competition held each year. This one is an oil called La Vida Sueño, which means life is a dream. And, you know, I actually fuzzed the face because it was a self-portrait and I didn't want anyone to recognise me. But this was me living the dream in Spain, in Alicante, where I studied as an Erasmus linguist student at university for 6 months. And, you know, having read Spanish literature, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Calderón. Well, his play, his work entitled La Vida Sueño, tells the story of a man called Segismundo. Segismundo was the heir to the Spanish throne, and he was actually imprisoned in a cellar and was never able to become king of the castle, so to speak. So the barriers behind me symbolise the social and economic hurdles that we face, which are insurmountable. And those actually, although I'm living a dream there, it's with the knowledge that I'm never going to become king of the castle. So there's like this black and white shading, half the face is in shadow and half lit up. And you know, that's the joy on the one hand, but the despair of what I'm returning to in Scotland after my stint in Spain. on the other.
So the titles are really quite important in.
Well, the titles mean quite a lot to me, but I think it's like you know, you're setting something out like a cryptic crossword, and so you know, it's interesting to have feedback and for people to come up and try to pick your brain and see, you know, what you intend by that.
This is a picture of your brother.
This is a picture of my brother, a bit sloshed after winning a cup at the local games, and it's entitled The Green-Eyed Monster. The Green-Eyed Monster, you can see him lurking behind there in the background. He's a non-gypsy who resents the fact that a gypsy traveller can be a champion piper. So there's this social and kind of racial, I don't know, how would you say, hatred really lurking there, present in the background. You know, I would say it's more than just envy. It's you know, bordering on racial hatred, and that's what that spells out to me. That painting depicts it.
I think you've talked a bit about that one.
Well, this one is, yeah, this is connected. It's a study of 3 children and oil on board, which I did for someone who asked me to. She just approached me, a friend of a friend, and asked me to do her portrait of her 3 kids. So I said, you know, yes, I'd be happy to do one. And as I say, it shows that we're all connected in a polysystem. You know, and you can't just divorce yourself and detach yourself from anyone or those around you, no matter how much you wish to do so. This one is called By Invitation Only. It's a watercolour of my other grandparents, and you know, what I hope to convey to the audience here is that you cannot just become a gypsy traveller. You won't be admitted into their ranks straight away anyway. You know, you have to be born one, and unless you're invited to take your place in Gypsy Traveller society, there's no point in trying to pass yourself off as one, because you'll just be a charlatan. You know, and you won't be accepted or, you know, recognised as a gypsy traveller. There are quite a lot of cross-cultural marriages now. Less, you know, there were less of those in those days. That's around 1930. But even now, you know, the people are still kind of held at a distance, non-gypsy travellers, and there's a wariness there between the gypsy and the non-gypsy, which I don't know if it will ever be, you know, overcome and broken down. It just exists, and it's just a difference, you know, it's there, it's a constant.
Can you tell us what you think about the level of self-representation among Roma gypsies and travellers?
I think that you have to look at it in the context of the funding possibilities and what is there for gypsy travellers to utilise and make use of. Now, in Scotland, for instance, there are no funds for community development, there are no support groups, there are no cultural drop-in centres, you know, there are no legal aid networks or assistance in that respect. There's an unwillingness, a lack of political will to fund anything to deal with gypsy travellers. Apart from, you know, it has to be said, apart from a group which goes around, you know, purporting to represent gypsy travellers and at the same time stating that they're not an ethnic group, that there's no ethnic difference. So, you know, the funding tends to go to your opponents rather than to gypsy traveller-led organisations or groups. So, you know, you have to look at it in that context, and you can't really blame them too much for the poor level of self-representation because they've been so disempowered.
How do you, given that that's the case, how do you think that Roma and gypsy groups represent themselves in a contemporary way? What's the challenge there, do you think?
Well, I think that most of the creative outlets are closed off, and that can result in gypsy travellers imploding. You know, I hear a lot of people shouting and breaking things normally, drinking heavily and attempting to self-destruct. But, you know, the arts, as I say, that does, you know, allow them, it occupies a place for them to express things creatively. And so you have the storytellers, you have the singers, you have, you know, people who are doing the visual art like myself. But again, you know, there's not a lot of interest within the wider community. So they're facing the consternation really of the, you know, wider society, which frowns upon the culture, and as a knee-jerk reaction to that, they tend to take it out on Gypsy Traveller arts, you know, attempts at art, music, storytelling. It's all devalued and depreciated.
So what do you see the way forward as being?
The way forward, I think that they need to press the case for, you know, legal reforms through litigation. That, you know, there must be more representation at a political level, because Gypsy Travellers are not appointed as MPs, MSPs. You never see them in any bodies. They don't have any input into EHRC strategies. They're not invited to pass on their comments or you know. So at the moment, you know, there's a whole body, a whole establishment, you know, set up against Gypsy Travellers that must be surmounted, must be overcome. You know, you have to be strategic and pinpoint the weaknesses, you know, that you feel are going to allow you to get your foot in the door and have an impact. So,
So what's your next move with your art, would you say?
well, no one ever expected anything of my art, so it's just, you know, it's a privilege to be here and to be able to put some on display, because, you know, I do my art principally for, you know, my own reasons. I think I find it therapeutic, and you know, it saves me from venting my anger and my aggression in other ways with a 14-pound hammer. So, you know, it's an outlet for me. It's a personal thing, and if other people appreciate it, then so be it. If they don't, then, you know, it's their choice.
Well, thank you for being with us today, Shamus.
It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure speaking to you.
And as I say, there are quite a few materials laid out here, you know, for your perusal, and I do have a DVD of a documentary which was filmed about myself and Rosanna and the whole situation at Bobbin Mill through BBC Alpa. That's here. I'll leave that as a memento, and if anyone wants to attend a screening of it, then, you know, contact the relevant person.
Thank you, Shamus.
That'll be Maria, right? Thanks. Thank you.